Why is it that in almost every game, someone dies to a jungle gank right around 5 minutes? And if they don't, it's almost guaranteed that they should have. It's mostly just the fault of the jungler if it doesn't happen, because laners never know how to play specifically at this one timer. Even if we look at Challenger, we can see that it's a very frequent occurrence. So in low elo, you can be sure that if you understand this oversight and knowledge, you can definitely abuse it. For laners and junglers alike, we're going to explore this phenomenon and make sure that you know just why this happens and how you can absolutely ruin someone's day with knowledge alone. And as a quick reminder, guides like this are only possible because of our awesome subscribers at skillcap.com. It's there you'll find premium courses for every role and skill that you need to learn to start improving fast. We also release 10 brand new Smurf commentaries every week where a challenger teaches you how to climb out of the exact rank you're stuck in. And if you're looking for something more personal instead, then we've got you covered with one-on-one coaching from our trained challenger experts. The best part, if you don't significantly improve while actively using SkillCap, then you get your money back, no questions asked. So what are you waiting for? Get the rank you've always wanted and click the link in the description below. To explain why this 5-minute kill phenomenon exists, we first need to understand the gap in knowledge that almost every player has. That's the root cause of it. To elaborate, let's talk about another gank timing that seems to always work, even though it shouldn't. Full clearing is probably the most common jungle path by a large margin. And you would think that after thousands of games of seeing it, laners and junglers alike would know how to deal with it. Yet somehow full clearing into ganking the nearby lane afterwards works all the time. Even more so than the 5-minute timer, as players get better, the deaths from a full clear into gank will often stop because junglers are very aware of it and will often show up to counter gank each other. This, or laners will simply make their lane state ungankable during this time and or go get wards. Basically, players get better at 1, tracking the jungler, and 2, managing waves and avoiding this gank. It isn't hard to see why this gank timing stops working as often, because full clearing into a gank is just extremely predictable. You're almost always going to know where the enemy jungler starts due to seeing who leashes. And if you haven't seen someone yet around 315 and you know they're pathing into a specific side, you can know for sure that they're going to be looking for something to do after their camps. And ganking happens to be pretty high up on that priority list. Players will intuitively catch on to the fact that they have to play around this timing as they get better, because it's not an inherently difficult concept to grasp. I mean, with enough time, anyone can understand if enemy jungle pathing to me, don't be easy gank. There's a ton of league jargon that gets thrown around in the pro and high elo scene especially, so you may have heard of the term strong side before. It essentially just denotes the side of the map that a jungler is pathing towards, since they will spend the majority of their time on that side. In general, you should strong side the lane that you think will contribute more to winning the game. For laners, knowing that the enemy is playing on your side will drastically change how you need to play the game. But in low elo, this understanding is non-existent, and it's why you see that full clear into gank work so much. I'm fairly confident that even low elo players know that we're in a bot lane meta, so it would make sense to most of the time strong side your bot lane, right? But every time you look at low elo, even though they know bot lane is OP, the junglers are pathing towards top every game. And if you look at Challenger, 90% of the time, both junglers are going to be pathing towards bottom. If even the junglers don't understand this dynamic in low elo, there's just no way that the laners do either. Clearly though, as players get better, their understanding of why it's valuable to strong side their important lane goes up, and the laners get a better idea of how to play around it. But it's not this understanding of strong side that causes the 5-minute gank timer to be so important. Rather, it's the understanding of the counterpart to the strong side, the weak side. When the enemy jungler isn't pathing into you, it makes a lot of sense to want to be aggressive, since you know that the enemy jungler will likely not come ruin your day. But this is not going to be true for the entirety of the game. The 5-minute gank works because it preys upon the lack of understanding of the weak side timer. If we were to draw a wave that visually represents the amount of time that a jungler spends on their strong side versus their weak side, it would probably look something like this. Junglers do spend a majority of their time on their strong side, but they do occasionally return to their weak side in short bursts to clear out camps. Junglers and laners both have a very specific gap in knowledge when it comes to this short timer. For junglers, they are often concerned with just getting back to their strong side as fast as they can, and they completely ignore their weak side. And for laners on their weak side, they will often assume that the jungler will just ignore them. So why does this 5-minute timer exist? Well, it just so happens that it's right in the middle of the very first weak side timer. I mean, just think about how most games should play out. A jungler clears into their strong side, looks for something to do, probably takes a scuttle crab, and uses more time looking for a gank on that side of the map. If the laners played well, no ganks will happen, and the jungler will inevitably recall. Since crabs spawn at 3:30 and recalling takes 8 seconds, they'll usually end up in base around 4 minutes. Running to their respawning camps takes about another 20 seconds, and this starts their weak side timer. While junglers won't be spending a lot of time on this side of the map, they have a couple of core ideas that you should be aware of during this time. Let's go back and look at that challenger game we showed briefly earlier. What I just described is pretty much exactly what happened to a T. Hecarim just full cleared, got the scuttle crab, recalled, and started heading back towards his weak side. He finds himself right at his gromp at 420. It's not difficult for Hecarim to make the right play now. He was going to be in the area anyways, so for him to run bot is not only convenient, but downright expected at this level of play. If we think of Hecarim's game plan to mostly be spending time on top side, we could also say that he just doesn't want to be spending a lot of time on bot side. And to achieve this, it's very common to make sure of one thing before you just clear your camps and path away from your weak side. If we look at the bot lane wave state here, we should know that this lane is pushing into our opponents. And because of this, it's extremely easy for the enemy jungler to come try and gank it. Not only are our teammates forced to walk up, but if they get pushed off of the wave, they're going to lose a lot of resources, since they can't access the farm. We can't completely ignore one side of the map and just hope for the best. So the ideal course of action is to ensure that our weak side isn't going to be forced to overextend while we just aren't going to be there. We can briefly make sure that they can push out this one wave by heading towards bottom, and then once they get their crash, we know that they're going to be safe as the wave comes back into them, and we'll be free to leave and path away back to the strong side once again. So Hecarim, regardless of Viego's gank here, should have headed towards bottom to hover on this weak side timer, and Spica just ended up playing right into Hecarim's most convenient and common play. For some reason, most players do an okay job of tracking the enemy jungler before their first recall, but then completely forget that they will return to their respawning camps. And that's why this 5-minute death seems to happen. Spica made a critical error in this game, specifically because he tried to gank bottom on Hecarim's weak side timer. And again, if pros fall victim to this, your opponents will too. Counterganking is one of the best ways to win games because it not only prevents a play, but gives you an advantage in the process. As a jungler, simply knowing about these common gank timings and playing for counterganks is one of the easiest ways to collect free LP. And this is not just applicable to this first weak side timer either. This is extremely similar to how right after 3:30, ganking mid is very hard. If you get a crab and the other jungler isn't at the one you just took and hasn't shown on map yet, you can probably assume they're just at the other one, and you're definitely on a collision course to meet mid lane. It should be completely expected to get counterganked if you go, since they were just going to be in that area already. Just watch this example from a Smurf commentary I did recently.
I can just mostly look for the countergank mid. The biggest problem is that I'm going to be a level down on him. But I can pretty confidently say that he's here right now. He likely just finished the crab in the same way that I just did. And I would rather play for countergank than overforce here.
Of course I say this and then immediately just disrespect my opponent and pay the price, but if anything, that just completely proves my point. We need to be very aware of all the convenient gank timers for our opponents so that we don't end up walking into terrible plays. The 3:31 is pretty well understood, but the 5-minute kill timer, as you saw against Spica, works even against pros. If you try to force on your opponent's weak side anywhere around 4:30 to 5 minutes, you should definitely just expect a countergank. If you're a laner, you need to flip a mental switch to turn off the aggression during these short timers. The easiest thing is of course to just try and manage your wave so that you'll crash around 4:20, and this all but guarantees your safety during the weak side timer from your opponent, and then you can go back to playing aggressively again. If you can't achieve this, you're just going to have to wait out this timing and give up a bit of CS while you wait for the enemy jungler to leave you alone. Warding preemptively of this timer can definitely help, and in general, we just need to start expecting to get ganked, and it should never be a surprise. Unfortunately for mid laners, you're kind of always gankable by the enemy jungler, but understanding how to play around your opponent's jungle timers is still incredibly important. You have one main defense against this, and it's going to make you get really comfortable with the sides of your lane. It's your job to constantly try and hug the side that you don't think the enemy jungler is on. At very high levels of play, knowing these timers and shifting from left to right of your lane makes all the difference. If we watch this replay, we can see that Lissandra starts hugging the side opposite from where Rek'Sai should be at this point, and that gives him just enough warning to cast E and barely escape the gank even with Rek'Sai's flash. In a full clear, you can expect the first quadrant to be done around 230. And this is why Lissandra moves to the right side of the lane to make the Rek'Sai gank more difficult. 230 for the transition gank from one side to the next, 330 for the crab timing, and 430 to 5 minutes for the first weak side timer are all something that you can just memorize and easily start implementing fixes for to just become more difficult to gank. Since it should now be relatively easy for us to recognize this gank timing, it's critical not to spend too much of your time on your strong side and fully ignore your weak side as a jungler. We can watch one of my diamond students replays to see a perfect example of this. He and Nocturne both end up pathing towards bottom in this game, and unfortunately he misses the counter gank on the full clear into gank that Nocturne does, since he chose to go for crab. He does show up, but it's not in time to actually get the kill. It's not the end of the world to miss one play like this, but the real problem happens afterwards. He spends entirely too much time on bot side after Nocturne disappears. He takes some bot lane farm, and then wanders into the enemy jungle to get deep wards and starts his base around 430. Well, why exactly is this problematic? Because we know that Nocturne's most likely play is to head towards topside on this weak side timer, and he's going to make sure that his laner can safely push out the lane. Since we use 30 seconds to do other stuff, our weak side timer starts later than Nocturne's, and we're now going to be completely unable to counter the gank that we should know is coming top lane. Matching the other jungler's timer would have allowed Vi to completely prevent this gank and win the game practically on the spot. But because he was just a little bit late, the 5-minute death strikes again. At its core, this is a relatively simple concept, but I think you can see how the small nuances make even great players fall victim to this gank timing so consistently. If as a jungler, you aren't there to counter this gank, or as a laner, if you manage your wave poorly, you can be in for a world of hurt should you forget about this timer. Don't forget to keep tracking the enemy jungler even after their first recall, because if you do, you will completely avoid this dreaded phenomenon altogether and stop giving your opponents free kills. And for everything else you need to start improving fast and ranking up, there's our website, skillcap.com. Our service is backed by a rank up guarantee, so there's no risk. If you don't significantly improve while actively using Skillcapped, then you get your money back, no questions asked. So what are you waiting for? Get the rank you've always wanted and click the link in the description below. All right, and that will do it for this one. From all of us here at Skillcapped, thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.